It happened fast enough that nobody on that block processed it in real time, since the movement felt wrong before the noise made sense. Two cars slid into place where shopping bags and summer conversations usually lived, while people nearby stayed frozen longer than they should have. The sidewalk never had a name in the story it entered, though cameras would later remember every second clearly. Nothing about that moment grew out of chance, even if it looked sudden from the outside. That afternoon only made sense after rewinding years earlier, back before faces had reputations and nicknames meant nothing. Before Marcus Smart ever carried a nickname that stuck outside his neighborhood, he was just another kid growing up inside Parkway Gardens on Chicago's South Side. Parkway Gardens sat at 64th Street and King Drive, built decades earlier as working-class housing before neglect reshaped daily life. People who lived there did not describe it as chaos, since routine formed around conditions rather than fear. Kids learned which stairwells stayed active, which corners stayed quiet, and which hours required moving differently. That awareness arrived early, long before anybody talked about survival like a slogan. Marcus Smart was born around 1997, growing up during years when the building complex already carried weight across the South Side. Teachers later recalled him as quiet, focused, and capable, especially during elementary school years before teenage pressures kicked harder. School mattered, though it never functioned as an escape route, since everyone returned home to the same blocks afterward. Family structures stayed tight enough to keep routines normal, even while police activity and memorial shirts became background visuals. Loss never announced itself as a turning point, since it arrived gradually and kept showing up. Parkway Gardens later became known as O Block, named after O.D. Perry, who was killed in August 2011. That naming mattered, since blocks in Chicago carry memory through titles rather than plaques or official recognition. Once the name stuck, the building stopped feeling anonymous to outsiders, which shifted how residents got treated across surrounding areas. Marcus was already a teenager by then, watching adults react differently after that name gained traction. Reputation moved faster than facts, and people adjusted accordingly without discussing it openly. Violence existed nearby long before anybody labeled it a problem worth fixing, which shaped how normal felt inside the complex. Arrests happened often enough that sirens blended into nights rather than interrupting them. Funerals rotated through churches with regularity, sometimes for people barely older than Marcus himself. That repetition dulled shock while sharpening awareness, creating a mindset where permanence felt unreliable. Kids still laughed and argued, though expectations stayed narrow about how far anybody would travel away. Marcus finished school, which already separated him from plenty of peers whose paths closed earlier. People around him described drawing, music, and quiet humor rather than aggression during those years. Older guys from the block stayed visible, though nobody officially trained anyone into roles or responsibilities. Influence worked subtly, shaped by proximity and repetition rather than instructions. Belonging started as convenience, not ideology, since familiarity often replaced choice. As the years passed, friendships overlapped with loss, while loyalty developed without formal conversation. Names kept disappearing from conversations, replaced by murals and shirts that hung during the summer. Marcus stood inside those moments without stepping forward immediately, learning how silence worked just as well as participation. Nobody announced transitions into street life, since those lines blurred gradually. Long before cameras cared, Marcus already understood where he stood. The tension between O Block and STL-EBT did not start with one incident, since Chicago feuds rarely follow clean timelines. STL-EBT, often called Tuckerville, operated around 63rd Street and St. Lawrence Avenue, just blocks away from Parkway Gardens. Geography mattered more than ideology, since proximity created constant contact without trust. Over time, Unresolved deaths turned into reference points rather than memories, shaping how younger people interpreted everyday movement. Each side carried names that stayed active long after funerals ended. O.D. Perry's killing in 2011 hardened boundaries that already existed beneath the surface. After that, Parkway Gardens stopped being just housing, while Tuckerville stopped being just another nearby block. Retaliation followed, though rarely in ways outsiders could map cleanly. When Gakira Barnes, known as K.I., was killed in 2014, it further anchored the conflict inside collective memory. Each death answered something older, while opening new questions that demanded response later. Music entered that environment as documentation rather than fantasy, capturing what people already understood locally. Drill music amplified names, stories, and emotions, pushing neighborhood conflicts into wider audiences without adding protection. Rappers like Chief Keef, Lil Durk, King Von, and FBG Duck became reference points beyond music itself. Songs mentioned real people, real streets, and real losses, which blurred performance from personal history. Once the track circulated online, the audience expanded while the consequences stayed local. FBG Duck represented STLEBT publicly, while King Von carried O-Block's presence into mainstream attention. Their lyrics referenced existing tensions rather than inventing new ones, which prosecutors later emphasized repeatedly. Diss tracks did not create hostility, though they kept it active and visible. Social media extended that reach, allowing comments, jokes, and threats to circulate without mediation. Younger members absorbed those messages, even if they never recorded anything themselves. Expectations shifted as generations changed, since younger guys inherited responsibilities attached to names they never chose. Respect stopped being about individual actions, becoming tied to collective reputation instead. Silence sometimes read as weakness, especially when online audiences watch closely. By the late 2000s, tension between O-Block and Tuckerville felt permanent rather than situational. Marcus Smart grew into adulthood inside that atmosphere, carrying awareness shaped by years of proximity. He did not start the conflict, though he stood inside its gravity like everyone else nearby. As names disappeared and others rose, the stage narrowed toward a few figures who would later dominate headlines. That shift happened slowly, then all at once. By the mid-2000s, drill music stopped feeling like background noise and started acting like a loud mirror nobody could ignore. What began as local storytelling moved outward fast, pulling streets into phones, playlists, blogs, comment sections, and police briefings. Every song became searchable, every lyric replayed, every video paused and dissected by people far removed from the blocks mentioned. That attention created reach, though it also erased the distance that once kept conflicts contained. Once names traveled further than bodies, movement became harder to disguise. For artists coming out of Chicago, drill never functioned as an escape route in the way outsiders imagine. The music documented realities that already existed, which meant listeners heard raw detail without filters or metaphors. When rappers mentioned streets, lost friends, or enemies, those references stayed literal to people nearby. Opposing sides recognized themselves immediately, which turned songs into statements, whether intended or not. Creative expression still mattered, though interpretation quickly slipped from the artist's control. FBG Duck stood inside that system as a visible representative of STLEBT, though his role stayed more complicated than headlines suggested. He rapped openly about loss, survival, and retaliation, drawing from years of proximity rather than sudden inspiration. His music gained traction, which placed him under brighter lights without offering protection. Attention followed him everywhere, especially online spaces where commentary never slept. Once his name circulated nationally, anonymity disappeared permanently. King Von occupied a parallel position for O Block, though his path followed a different arc through the same ecosystem. His storytelling style blended vivid detail with confident delivery, drawing audiences deeper into narratives rooted in real streets. Fans praised authenticity, while critics questioned boundaries between art and admission. Regardless of intention, visibility reshaped expectations around him and those close by. Being seen stopped feeling optional once momentum built. Videos amplified everything further, turning moments into visuals that traveled faster than explanations could follow. Jewelry, hand signs, background faces, and locations became evidence to viewers searching for meaning. Screenshots froze frames that artists never meant to linger. Social media rewarded reaction rather than nuance, pushing content toward extremes. Every upload added layers to reputations that no single person fully controlled. A line posted online might spark arguments, while comments escalated into threats without pause. Younger members absorbed those exchanges, learning expectations indirectly through likes and reposts. Silence often looked louder than speech in that environment. Law enforcement watched closely as well, studying lyrics and videos alongside surveillance footage. Drill became a reference point during investigations, though rarely as a sole source of evidence. Music did not cause violence, though it mapped relationships clearly for anyone paying attention. When names overlapped between tracks and police reports, interpretation hardened quickly. That scrutiny extended to everyone appearing nearby, not only those holding microphones. Marcus Smart stayed adjacent to that attention without becoming its focus immediately. He appeared in videos, photographs, and social posts tied to O Block's rising visibility. His presence signaled belonging rather than leadership, though cameras treated every face equally. Being nearby mattered more once content circulated widely. The line between participant and observer blurred under constant observation. As the drill expanded outward, options narrowed inward for those involved. Leaving neighborhoods did not erase affiliations preserved online. Moving carefully mattered less when algorithms surfaced old footage repeatedly. Visibility trapped people inside narratives they could not revise easily. What once felt like an opportunity slowly reshaped into exposure. Deaths inside O Block arrived unevenly, though each one carried lasting weight across the community. Some losses happened publicly, others quietly, though the impact spread regardless. Funerals stacked close together during certain stretches, leaving little time to process grief fully. Each absence altered daily routines, reshaping who gathered where and why. Over time, loss stopped shocking and started instructing behavior. The death of J Money in 2013 marked a significant emotional rupture inside O Block. He carried influence locally, which made his killing resonate beyond immediate circles. People spoke about it carefully, though anger lingered under conversations. Retaliation rumors circulated without confirmation, fueling tension rather than closure. That moment stayed active in memory long after news cycles moved on. When Troy T. Roy Johnson was killed in February 2017, the impact intensified across generations. He held status earned through presence rather than publicity, which magnified reaction. Younger members watched closely, reading expectations without explicit instruction. Silence felt heavier afterward, interpreted as hesitation rather than restraint. That shift influenced how participation became measured. Grief hardened gradually into obligation, shaping how loyalty functioned within the block. Mourning rarely ended with funerals, since reminders stayed everywhere. Shirts, murals, lyrics, and stories kept names alive. Each remembrance reinforced responsibility tied to identity rather than individual choice. Doing nothing began to carry a social cost. Street belief filled gaps left by limited verified information, creating narratives that circulated freely. Some stories reflected truth, others speculation shaped by emotion. People learned to separate confirmed facts from assumptions, though both influenced behavior similarly. Rumors traveled faster than clarity, especially during emotionally charged periods. Certainty mattered less than shared belief. Marcus Smart existed close enough to these moments to feel pressure without holding command. He lost friends alongside everyone else, absorbing expectation through proximity. His name surfaced more frequently within conversations about response, though evidence of direct action remained limited publicly. Presence alone signaled alignment during tense periods. Gradually, the distance from the center shrank. Expectations shifted quietly, reframing restraint as avoidance rather than maturity. Younger members faced subtle tests of commitment, measured through visibility and reaction. Social circles tightened, while scrutiny increased from both sides. Moving cautiously became harder as the stakes climbed. Neutral ground faded within daily routines. Alignment happened without formal declaration, shaped by shared loss and collective memory. People showed loyalty through attendance, association, and silence when required. Over time, those patterns hardened into perceived roles. Once assigned, those roles rarely loosened easily. Belonging became less about choice and more about momentum. By the late 2000s, grief inside O Block carried weight that influenced decisions without direct conversation. Each loss stacked pressure toward action, while patience appeared increasingly costly socially. Marcus Smart stood closer to the center than before, though not by design. The ground shifted beneath everyone involved, narrowing exits quietly. By summer 2020, the mood around O Block felt like tension with a schedule. People still laughed outside, though the jokes carried sharper edges than before. Conversations sounded casual, yet everybody understood the same underlying scoreboard. FBG Duck's name stayed in circulation for years, though July 2020 turned the volume higher. His diss record, Dead Bitches, landed heavy across the city since it named dead O Block figures directly. Those references traveled through YouTube reactions, Instagram pages, and group chats quickly. People replayed it, clipped it, quoted it, then argued about it. Even if music did not create the conflict, it made the disrespect easier to share. That sharing shaped expectation in a way that did not require planning meetings. A few words in a comment section could become the next day's conversation outside a building. A laugh on a live stream could get interpreted as approval of something darker. People who never left their own blocks still felt involved, since the internet kept dragging everyone together. That environment rewarded quick responses, while patience looked like hesitation. The bounty rumor slid into that atmosphere like gasoline near a grill. Police documents later discussed an informant's claim about money being offered for Duck, starting around $50,000, later raised to $100,000. That claim did not name a specific person publicly in those documents, even though fans filled in blanks. Separately, people pointed to custom O Block chains and asked what that meant. None of that rumor became courtroom proof by itself, yet the story still mattered. It mattered since a bounty rumor does not need to be true to shape behavior. Once people believed money or prestige sat on the table, it changed how they read every move. It also changed how rivals talked, since they started framing Duck as a marked man. Some dismissed it as internet fiction, while others treated it like common knowledge. Either way, the rumor tightened the air. Coordination in that world rarely looks like formal planning. It looks like familiar faces gathering at predictable spots, then moving when a message lands. It looks like shared readiness has been built over the years, not one special day. People understood who would ride, who would drive, and who would watch for police. The details could shift, yet the logic stayed consistent. By early August, timing mattered more than long plotting. Opportunity would come through sighting, location, and seconds, not through speeches. If someone saw a duck in the open, the moment could turn into a decision quickly. That kind of decision relied on momentum already built. Once momentum met opportunity, everything could lock into place. August 4th, 2020 started like a regular weekday until the timeline tightened. In the afternoon, Carlton FBG Duck Weekly was in Chicago's Gold Coast near East Oak Street. He was there with his girlfriend, plus another man who stayed close. The area was upscale, filled with stores like Dolce and Gabbana. That setting mattered later, since it drew cameras and public attention. Federal investigators later described how the pieces aligned back on the south side. Surveillance and records placed several O-Block associates at Parkway Gardens before the shooting. Those names included Marcus Muwop Smart, Charles C. Murder Liggins, Kenneth Kenny Mac Robertson, to Carlos Loss Offord, and Christopher C. Thang Thomas. Another associate, Ralph Tall or Teasy Turpin, was later accused of acting as a spotter. Prosecutors framed all of it as a coordinated movement, not a random coincidence. According to the government's timeline, vehicles were the backbone of that movement. A Ford Fusion and a Chrysler 300 became the main transport that afternoon. Footage and camera hits showed people leaving O-Block and getting into those cars. Investigators said the two vehicles then drove north toward downtown Chicago. The route appeared repeatedly on POD camera systems along the way. The key shift came when the location of Duck became known. Authorities later alleged that Turpin provided Duck's location to the group. That tip mattered, since the Gold Coast was not a place you just guessed. Once that location was confirmed, timing became a race against chance. The cars reached the area within minutes, moving like they already knew what they wanted. That speed suggested readiness that existed before the tip arrived. On East Oak Street, the moment unfolded in a short burst. Reports described 4 shooters exiting the 2 vehicles near the luxury shopping strip. The attack lasted roughly 15 seconds, based on surveillance review and official statements. Shell casings collected at the scene totaled 38, showing heavy gunfire without lingering. One casing type stood out, a .357 caliber casing, suggesting at least one revolver was used. Duck was struck repeatedly and collapsed on the sidewalk. An FBI account described him as being shot approximately 21 times, while a later report referenced a medical examiner's count of 16 gunshot wounds. Those numbers differ, yet both indicate the same outcome. His girlfriend was shot in the wrist during the chaos. The other man was also shot, with reports describing multiple wounds. The shooters got back into the 2 vehicles immediately after the gunfire stopped. Cameras then tracked the Ford Fusion and Chrysler 300, leaving the Gold Coast quickly. Investigators later described how the cars were seen moving south again on camera networks. That visual trail mattered, since it offered continuity from Parkway Gardens to Oak Street, then back again. The government treated that continuity as the spine of the case. After the shooting, the city reacted in layers. News footage showed the Gold Coast scene as police secured an area not used to that kind of violence. Videos circulated online, pulling street conflict into a wealthy shopping district. Duck's death hit Chicago hard, since he was a known rapper, plus a father of 4. People argued immediately about motive, meaning, and what would come next. Investigators kept working while the public speculated loudly. The Chrysler 300 was later found abandoned, according to reporting tied to the affidavit narrative. A search of that car reportedly turned up a handwritten note listing social media information tied to Charles Liggins. The car search also reportedly recovered a spent .357 casing connected to the same unusual caliber casing at the scene. Those details became important since they linked physical items to the broader timeline. Prosecutors also looked at phone data, which they said lined up with vehicle movement. That approach did not rely on one witness telling everything. Instead, it stacked cameras, pings, and recovered items into a sequence. The government later described the shooting as murder in aid of racketeering, tied to O Block as an enterprise. Those charges came later, yet the basic narrative started forming right away. The immediate aftermath on the street did not offer closure. Duck's family mourned publicly while his mother urged people not to retaliate. Online spaces still filled with disrespect, grief, plus celebration from some corners. The conflict did not stop after Oak Street, since history was still unresolved. That afternoon simply exposed the feud to a wider world. Nothing about August 4th stayed contained, even during the first few days. The Gold Coast location ensured national headlines, while the surveillance density ensured investigative leverage. Every camera frame became a breadcrumb, and every rumor became content for viewers. O Block faces gained new attention, while Tuckerville supporters focused on loss. That collision of fame, grief, and evidence set the stage for what followed. After the shooting, nothing moved loudly at first, since investigators worked quietly while public attention burned itself out online. Detectives leaned on timestamps, camera grids, license plate readers, and phone metadata rather than interviews. Chicago's camera density mattered here, especially downtown, where movement leaves trails whether people notice or not. Every intersection added another frame, another angle, another confirmation of direction. Slowly, a path emerged without anybody needing to explain it verbally. The Ford Fusion and Chrysler 300 became anchors inside that reconstruction. Investigators traced both vehicles from Parkway Gardens north through multiple camera hits toward the Gold Coast. That trail mattered since it connected origin, destination, and return within a narrow window. Phone records supported the same movement pattern, showing devices traveling with the cars. The government later described this overlap as consistency rather than coincidence. Ballistics added another layer without needing eyewitness drama. 38 shell casings were recovered from the Oak Street scene, including a .357 caliber casing. That caliber stood out since revolvers eject differently than semi-automatic firearms. When the Chrysler 300 was located later, investigators reported finding a matching .357 casing inside. That match helped tie physical evidence to the movement already mapped. Searchers produced smaller details that carried weight through context. Inside the Chrysler, investigators documented a handwritten note listing social media accounts and identifiers connected to Charles Liggins. That note did not explain the motive, though it reinforced the presence. Combined with phone data, cameras, and vehicle tracking, it became another thread. Each thread mattered more through accumulation than impact alone. Federal involvement quietly reshaped the direction of the case. Prosecutors chose racketeering charges strategically, not symbolically. Framing the case around enterprise activity allowed the government to connect people, behavior, and history into one structure. That structure relied on patterns rather than isolated actions. The decision expanded the scope without needing sensational claims. Arrests came later once the narrative hardened enough to stand. On October 13, 2021, federal agents arrested Marcus Smart along with Charles Liggins, Kenneth Robertson, Carlos Offord, and Christopher Thomas. During his initial court appearance, Marcus Smart identified himself as a church janitor when asked about employment. That statement traveled fast, though context stayed thin. The nickname followed afterward, shaped more by reaction than intent. When indictments were unsealed, attention returned sharply. The charging documents alleged murder in aid of racketeering tied to O Block as an enterprise. Additional charges included firearms use and conspiracy. Prosecutors emphasized structure, movement, and coordination rather than emotion. At that point, the case stopped being a street rumor and became a federal record. The trial unfolded without spectacle, built around sequencing rather than shock. Prosecutors walked jurors through timelines step by step, layering footage, phone records, and recovered items. Each piece linked backward and forward, showing continuity instead of chaos. The government avoided relying on one witness to explain everything. That approach reduced vulnerability to collapse. Music entered the courtroom as context, not confession. Lyrics, videos, and posts were presented to illustrate relationships and awareness, not to prove action alone. Defense teams pushed back, arguing that creative expression did not equal criminal conduct. Judges allowed limited interpretation tied to timing and reference. The court treated art as one layer among many. Recorded messages and social media activity also came under scrutiny. Prosecutors pointed to posts made after the shooting, arguing they showed awareness and reaction. Defense counsel argued interpretation relied too much on an assumption. Jurors had to decide how much meaning to assign. The case did not hinge on any single caption or lyric. When verdicts arrived in January 2024, they reflected structure rather than sentiment. All 6 defendants were convicted on core counts tied to murder and conspiracy. Some additional charges resulted in mixed outcomes depending on evidence specificity. Mandatory life sentences followed under federal guidelines. The court resolved jurisdiction, not the deeper conflict. After conviction, Marcus Smart's name carried weight shaped by a nickname more than biography. The Janitor stuck as shorthand, reducing a life into one moment of courtroom dialogue. Fans debated its meaning online, framing it through irony, humor, or dismissal. Supporters argued it showed humility or misinterpretation. Critics treated it as evidence of deception. That label overshadowed earlier years, flattening complexity into meme form. It ignored upbringing, environment, and gradual alignment that shaped his path. Family members stayed quieter, absorbing the outcome rather than engaging in debate. For them, the nickname never mattered as much as finality. Life sentences closed doors permanently. Public reaction split along familiar lines. Some viewed the convictions as overdue accountability. Others saw targeting of drill culture and the neighborhood association. Social media amplified both positions endlessly. That noise rarely changed facts already decided in court. The story began with the movement stopping suddenly on a downtown sidewalk. It ended with the movement ending inside prison walls. Between those points lived years of visibility, loyalty, pressure, and timing. Understanding that change does not offer comfort, though it offers clarity. History rarely pauses for intention once momentum takes over.